Well, first of all, saving the best for last, obviously. Thank you, everybody, for sticking around this long. We're wrapping up the 2 days. I'm sure everybody's tired and wants to get to a beer or go home. So thank you for sticking around. Yeah, and as you can imagine, my talk is going to be about developers, developers, developers. But more seriously. Yeah, so just quick intro to get this out of the way. I'm Andrew, Director of Engineering and currently at Leap Tools. Started as a developer almost 20 years ago. Spent about half my career in senior leadership. So, lots of experience in kind of building teams and setting them up for success and thinking about what it means to grow talent from, the ground up and both at sort of individual and manager level. So that's something that I've been kind of focusing on quite a bit recently and had a chance to experiment with that a little bit at a few different companies I've been recently to try to come up with some principles that I feel like hold true more or less universally. So generally, as engineering leaders, we are looking to build strong teams. We're looking to set up our companies for success and really sort of maximize the engineering capacity. And when it comes to that, before we jump into this, one thing that I've noticed is, especially with a lot of technical founders that kind of grow with a company and kind of grow into that CTO role of starting with maybe a couple of devs and then maybe managing a larger team after a while, they tend to sort of over-index a little bit on the technical output instead of really kind of thinking about the organizational growth and how to set up the team for success and how to set up the company for success. So the one thing that I've read, this was a few years back, but if you haven't read any of the Jim Collins, either Good to Great or Built to Last, he talks about how to kind of set up companies for success and what long-lasting success looks like and some of the common patterns. And one of the things that I took away from the Good to Great book is your job as a leader is not just to build a machine, but build a machine that builds the machine after a certain point. So the shift really needs to happen once kind of the company is big enough where you really need to start to focus on the team and the organization and the process rather than the kind of the technical output and necessarily the product development. So how do you actually go about kind of maximizing your engineering productivity? And it really comes to, you really only have two levers in this regard. One is hiring, and second is coaching, right? Setting up the team for success, growing them. We don't always have the budget to hire, but we can always coach and we can always help folks get to that next level. So what is coaching? I mean, so just some simple definitions before I can get into sort of the meat of the presentation. It's really just sort of helping folks develop the technical skills and the soft skills to set them up for success in their career and hopefully have the right impact on the organization. When it comes to seniority, I think a lot of folks, individuals, developers, they tend to focus on sort of the positive, the benefits of being a more senior person on the team, whether it's the title or the accolades or having a seat in the room, maybe higher compensation. But the other side of it, I think, is really also important to emphasize to the folks on the team and the things that we look for as leaders when we put somebody in a position of a specific seniority. Like we look for ownership and the impact you're driving, accountability. We want to make sure that what sort of the expectations are, so you can deliver on those expectations within the company and the role. And at the end of the day, a lot of it is just about trust. Do I trust you as a person to deliver on this large project, and can you actually perform what me and the company sort of expect you to do? When it comes to progression, I think there's also a lot of misconception around that, especially from sort of more junior folks when they first get into the industry. What does it mean to get promoted? How do I become senior? And there's a lot of confusion around it. I think a lot of people tie seniority to tenure, which I think is a mistake. I've seen a lot of folks that have been in the industry for 10 plus years and they can't do more than sort of an intermediate dev's worth of work. So really, seniority and progression comes down more to impact rather than a time in seat, and that needs to be kind of made clear. There will be some natural gates for progression too. It's hard to get promoted into director if the scope is only like a five-person team. Same for on the IC track. Doesn't make sense for folks to be made a principal engineer when it's a 10-person startup, right? You can be that entitled, but that doesn't really kind of give you the scope of what being principal really means. And the other thing too, I think, just kind of ensuring that folks understand that they're ultimately responsible for their own career and growth, and they're not relying on their manager to kind of get them promoted, but they understand sort of what they're responsible for, what the impact they need to have in order to progress to the next level. And lastly, I think generally the rule is there are no demotions. It's very rare where you can kind of step down gracefully from a role. So once you put somebody in a position of responsibility, you want to make sure that they're set up for success, and you don't want to put them in a spot where they'll kind of flounder and struggle. Just a quick show of hands. Who has heard of Peter Principle here? Okay, about half the room. Great. So maybe you can take something away from this after all. Peter Principle basically states that folks get promoted to the point of incompetence. The way this works is, at a lot of companies, is somebody's doing well, they're kicking ass in their current role, and they get promoted to the next role. And they don't really know what they're doing, they're struggling, they're learning, they maybe spend 6 months to a year kind of getting good again. They finally kind of figure it out, they grok it, and then they get promoted again. And and on it goes. And folks are constantly in this sort of like, they're learning to do the job, not actually doing the job. So that's kind of the situation you really want to avoid, because there should never be a question of whether like a person carrying a title within your company is truly of that level. And there's a few ways to avoid that. I think one of the most sort of talked about ones is kind of creating the separate IC and management ladder, and really sort of not pushing your super smart and technical folks into management for the sake of progression. I think a lot of companies, a lot of startups sort of fall into that trap. And if the person that's kind of moving into the management role doesn't really want to do it, or frankly suck at it, it just creates a very sort of bad environment for everybody on the team. Either the person burns out, or or the team basically suffers for it. So you need to be kind of really careful when you move folks into these people management roles. The other piece is, I think, also really kind of emphasizing consistency in performance at the next level before the promotion takes place. So, it may seem a little bit unfair, but really kind of requiring folks to perform at that sort of, if they're intermediate, performing at that senior level for at least 6 months to make sure that it's not a fluke, and they're actually able to kind of carry the load of that next level. And whenever possible, piloting and trialing the role for a little bit. A good example of this is the notion of kind of tech lead managers, where a tech lead sort of steps into, picks up a couple of reports just to kind of get their feet wet, understand what management is about, lower stakes before taking on a full team, and diving in head first. So, how do you actually go about this, and how do you kind of communicate these requirements to the folks on your team? And this is where sort of career frameworks usually come in. I think a lot of us have seen sort of competency matrices where you have levels on the y-axis, you have kind of competencies on the x-axis, and that's where a lot of folks start. But that, I feel like, is only it's an important artifact, but I think kind of creating a little bit more philosophy around it and talk about the process and how it happens and why it happens, I think is also important, as well as sort of supplemental documentation to those matrices. And the idea behind having this type of framework is to help folks make the right decisions and hopefully align their personal growth and progression to company impact, so that they're not sort of trying a bunch of different things to see what works to get them promoted. They have kind of a clear path towards getting to that next level, and hopefully doing the right things along the way to set up the company for success at the same time. Thankfully, if you're if you don't have something in place right now, you're thinking about it, or maybe you have something that's not quite there that you want to sort of augment, you don't really need to reinvent the wheel. A lot of companies have been very sort of gracious with sharing their career frameworks as open source. GitLab is famous for it. Dropbox, Carta, folks that presented here earlier, I've used, there's a Medium post that they have from 2018 that's actually really good. Few others that I think you can kind of borrow from. Progression.fyi is a great resource that lists hundreds of these types of frameworks that are available for you to borrow from. So if you are starting to think about kind of creating a framework, like where do you actually begin? You may be using somebody else's, but at the end of the day, you really need to think about what it means for your company, and not everybody's sort of approach will land well. For some companies, moving fast and breaking things is more important. For others, being careful. If you're working on medical devices, you probably don't want to kind of take the Facebook approach. So another, I keep quoting Jim Collins here, but in Built to Last, I think he talks about is a lot of the successful companies that they've seen have a common pattern they've seen is they have core values defined. They couldn't find a particular pattern about what those core values should be, but what they did found, it was important for companies to have values and to sort of embrace them and bake them into everyday decision making. Yeah, and just sort of talking about what core values are, I've seen companies that are 1,000 people plus that don't have values defined. And you don't necessarily need to do it for the organization as a whole. If you want to do it in your world and focus specifically on software engineering, I think that's a good place to start. But really what values are is a guideline for everyday decision making, right? Do we want folks to have a high degree of ownership? Do we want them to be customer obsessed? Do we want them to be detail oriented, or act with urgency? Whatever it is that you feel is important, write that down. Talk with the team, make sure that folks are on the same page, and that gives you that initial roadmap to help with hiring, to help with performance evaluation, to sort of and also kind of give folks feedback about sort of what's important, and if they're lacking in a certain area, allow them to kind of give them guidance to get to where you need them to be. So speaking of sort of evaluation, how do you actually evaluate developers, and how do you evaluate performance? If you ask Joel Spolsky, it's very simple. Smart, gets things done, right? That's kind of that's sort of been that's been my mantra for the past 20 years. Those are really the two things to kind of evaluate developer capability. There's a lot of very senior folks that can't ship for the life of them. There's a lot of junior folks that will write thousands of lines of code that need to be rewritten 2 weeks later. So finding that balance of smart and gets things done is kind of your optimal sort of what you'd be looking in a developer. But there's a little bit more to that, and what I found is basically these 4 things that I feel like are important in any developer. And I've sort of seen this work pretty well across a few different companies. I think first and foremost, a high degree of ownership. Being responsible for your domain, being responsible for your system, caring about quality, caring about sort of shepherding the system forward, being active on any sort of outages. No such thing as not my job. Really sort of having a long-term thinking about the system that you're building. Secondly is execution. That's the gets things done part. Are you actually shipping code? Are you sort of getting the product out the door? really sort of focusing on that and achievement, I think, is extremely important, because it's very easy to kind of just spin gears and talk about solutions and never actually arriving anywhere. Third is mastery, and that's the smart part of smart and gets things done. How good are you at your craft? Are you able to actually perform at the senior level or at the staff level, or even at the junior level sometimes? And it's not so much a static thing as, are you learning? Are you growing? Are you developing the skills that you need to be successful within the company and the industry as a whole? And lastly is leadership. It's a bit of a catch-all. This is where sort of you talk about communication and collaboration and just being a good team member and mentorship. Are you lifting people up? Are you enabling folks around your team to be better developers? So just creating sort of a great kind of collaborative team chemistry. I also have, so by the way, this was more kind of focused on individual contributors. I have like a framework that I think about for managers, and I thought it was extremely clever when I came up with this 5P system. As you can notice, all the words start with a P, which is a nice coincidence. I thought it was extremely clever that when I came up with that, but even a cursory Google search will tell you there's a bunch of other people that are talking about this. So, it was just sort of a nice coincidence when I thought of this. Basically, these are kind of the things that I believe engineering managers and leaders should be thinking about and focusing on, and kind of the breadth of their responsibility falls into one of these 5 categories. Number 1 is purpose. Simon Sinek, start with why. Why are we doing what we're doing? What are we trying to achieve? What are those kind of big audacious goals that we're trying to get to, and what does and how do you kind of communicate that effectively to the rest of the team and get that buy-in, get them to align and kind of march in the same direction. The second piece is who. So who are we working with? It's the hiring, it's the performance management, it's the people on the team. It's holding them accountable. It's helping them with deliveries. It's helping them with achieving their career goals, performance management, things like that. Then, product is, what is it that we're building? If you're lucky enough to have a product manager that you're working with, great. They can be responsible for sort of the roadmap definition, hopefully, and it's your job then to execute and deliver on that. Hopefully, you have the right sort of product mindset to actually challenge, some of the product decisions that are being made, and also being able to kind of teach that product mindset to the engineers to make sure that they're focusing on the right outcomes for the company and not just sort of for their own code or their own career. The fourth item is platform. So this is one part of the how. These are kind of all your technical decisions, performance, quality, coding language we use, platform we use, cloud platform, whatever else. These are all sort of within your scope of responsibility. Even if you're not making those decisions directly, full ownership, the buck stops with you. That's where kind of you need to be responsible for those decisions. And final, last but not least, is of course process. SLDC. How do we go about planning? How do we go about actual delivery of the work that we signed up for? Communication to stakeholders. Rituals, things like that. And yeah, last but not least, this is a little bit serendipitous. I didn't plan this at all, but as Michael Lopp kind of kicked this conference off with talking about feedback being a gift, I surprisingly have the same kind of slide to round it out. Feedback is a gift. As managers, it's our job to set up our team for success, to help them understand what great looks like. And you owe it to your team to basically give them the right guidance to be successful both within the company, but in the industry as a whole. So yeah, go out there and help them get better. That's it. Okay, questions. When is the company big enough to focus on building the machines that build the machines? Yeah, great question. I think it's kind of hard to pinpoint. I think a lot of it is once your developers start asking questions about like, how do I get a promotion, I think is a good time to start thinking about some sort of a career ladder and, skills matrix. I think, once you get past that two pizza team, maybe two times two pizza teams is a good idea. Once you kind of start folks progressing into management and then into maybe staff roles and start asking questions about sort of what that looks like, I think it's a good idea to think about that a little bit. So maybe not startup, but I would say scale up stage and plus, I would expect to have something in place for that. If someone flounders in their new role and is not able to figure it out and you don't demote, what should you do? Well, I mean, the simple answer is it might not be the role for them and it might not be the company for them. If you can't figure out sort of the way out of the current role, if there's no sort of parallel role that they can transition into or, demotion is off the table, frankly, the best thing for their career might be to move on, right? It's hard, but sometimes you have to make those types of decisions as a leader. So it's, that's where sort of those kind of performance improvement plan conversations start happening, and eventually you sort of figure out what makes sense with it, and sometimes it makes sense to just move on. How do you avoid career ladders being viewed as checklists and, and checklists? And if you do avoid it, how do you make it fair? I think there's an art and a science to it. You don't want it to be too checklisty because it just makes for awkward conversations. Somebody might sort of check the boxes, but they might not still be ready. They haven't earned the trust or they haven't been doing it long enough, and it just makes it a difficult conversation. So I feel like, especially at the higher levels, there does need to be a little bit of room for ambiguity to be able to have a more productive conversation. So that would be my suggestion, is to try to kind of balance the kind of more concrete elements with some a little bit more open-ended that can be a little bit up for discussion. How do you handle natural gates without losing top talent? The company is not big enough to have a principal staff. It's hard. I don't have a good answer for this. Sometimes people outgrow companies. Sometimes companies outgrow people, right? Like it's just natural. Sometimes a founder of the company is great for kind of taking it from 0 to 1. They might not be the person to take it from, and a founder is sort of an extreme example, but like anybody on the team, they might not be the right person to take the team from 1 to 10 or 10 to 100, right? So how do you sort of figure out a way to, set up these folks for success? And I guess the question is sort of about the opposite example, when the company maybe stays flat, but the person is not able to, is wanting more without you being able to offer more. It's hard, sometimes it helps, like titles are cheap and I don't usually recommend sort of inflating titles, but sometimes that can help. Sometimes it is, compensation if you're able to. It's a difficult challenge, and sometimes it just means that the person will need to sort of find their growth elsewhere. Any learnings to share from rolling out career progression framework in existing organization which has not had one until now? Yeah, I think one thing is, I would say, try to do it, depending on what your performance cycle is, try to do it as early in your performance cycle as possible. So if you're doing annually or every 6 months, try to do it as early to sort of at the end of as close to the start of the performance cycle as possible, to give folks room to sort of understand what the expectations are. You don't want moving goalposts, so you want to make sure that folks really understand and have opportunity to ask questions, and you are able to have a few conversations. Having some presentations about it, talking about what's important and why we feel like it's important. Engineers tend to be very pragmatic, so they will try to kind of either game the system or try to at least understand it. So it does require a lot of conversation. yeah, it's just a lot of kind of conversation and discussion. And I think that's my time. All right. Thank you, everybody.